being able to process it, to get to a place of understanding, and then get out of that state of denial and get to acceptance. And once we get to that place of acceptance, then we can actually start looking from this day forward on how I'm going to overcome this obstacle that's in the way, how I can minimize it and reduce it. And from there, we generate strength. We get a strength that we didn't realize that we had. And that strength and that courage that we're getting is where that resilience is really starting to play a role in our life.
Every individual in life will reach a crossroads, a point when you've gotten to the end of your rope, the end of your road, and you can go no farther. And at that moment, you'll have to make a choice. Will you choose to give up, to give in, to throw in the towel and say, I can go no farther? Or will you choose resilience? You see, one of these concepts that we need to talk about when we talk about hope is resilience. Believing that something more is possible requires for something more to come from the inside of you. And today's guest is somebody who is an exemplary example of what it looks like to be and resemble and embody perseverance. His story is one that might make you laugh in some moments, make you cry in some moments, and ultimately will make you believe in yourself in certain moments, because what he speaks and what he truly offers to any audience that listens to him. And so I've been looking forward to this interview for several weeks. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Tiran Jackson on. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a coach. Tiran, welcome to Hope Rising.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello, Maurice and everyone out there. I hope everyone is doing great today and just ready to listen and learn and understand more about what it means to be resilient.
That's it. That's it. So for somebody who maybe they've never met you, they've never heard your story. I know you've really been all over the country at this point. Somebody who doesn't know you yet, how do you introduce yourself to others?
So I'm Tiran Jackson. I am a professional speaker, a life coach, and author. And I'm a man who's gone through an amazing transformation, a transformation I didn't plan for, but a transformation nonetheless to make me a better version of myself. I started out my career as an engineer and thought that was going to be what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And then life happened to me. And then as life was happening to me, I began to learn lessons and be changed in ways that I didn't imagine would happen based on what I went through. Now, without giving away the full story right now, because I know we're going to go deeper into it, but I'm an example of what God can do to you when you think you're at your lowest point, when you're at your place of despair, and then pull you through into a place that you never imagined.
That's so good. So, you know, one of the things that I do anytime I prepare for an interview is I try to do my research, right? I try to find interviews from the person I'm interviewing. I read parts of their book or all of their book. I try to make sure that I really understand the person. And one of the first things that I saw of you was an interview that you did, and it was several years ago after a great tragedy. You were on the news and you were talking about a moment that anybody who has read your book, they already know about, and I'm sure we're going to share it in a moment. And I was looking at this man. He was brokenhearted. He had very little energy. He was just trying to represent himself as best as possible. And he was certainly not the man who is sitting in front of me right now. And so I think we need to do justice in talking about this journey. So for somebody who doesn't know your story, can you share a little bit about what it is that you experienced that really rocked your life and ultimately put you on this course that you're on now?
Yeah, no problem. Let me take you guys back 5 years, okay? 5 years. This is 2018. At that point, my wife Maleka and I, we were celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. Now, that's saying a lot to be with that person and be in love and have 15 years going strong. And we were really looking forward to this moment, to this time to be able to get together. At the time, as I said, I was an engineer and I was engineering manager and I was traveling all over the country for my job. And when I wasn't traveling, she was traveling. She was a head of HR, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we would coordinate our work schedules around one another. So we were like two passing ships at the time. And it was just that point in time in life where we were both very busy. And our son, Cameron, he was 12 at the time. So he'd be used to staying with dad one week and then dad coming back and we get the weekend together and then mom leaves out on Monday. And then, so we were really in this time where we were very occupied, very busy. But with this anniversary coming up, we knew that was going to be a time for Maleka and I to really be able to spend some time together, block everything else out and reconnect and enjoy and cherish, the marriage and the time that we've had for that 15 years and discuss what the next 15 and the 15 after that and so on and so forth were going to be. So for this anniversary, we thought we booked a trip to the Bahamas. We were going to stay at an all-inclusive resort, have some relaxation, have some time to really enjoy ourselves, to unwind, and really plan on what the rest of our life looked like. We got to the Bahamas. The day before we went, I dropped Cameron, our son, off with his aunt and uncle 3-4 hours away and told him, son, I'll be back next week. And he was good with mom and dad going on their trip together because he knew that was something, a major time for us to be able to bond, and was excited to know that he was going to spend some time with his aunts, uncles, cousins, getting to do things that he wouldn't typically get to do while he was at home because, they let him do things that we might not have let him do, but it was all good. This was the summertime, so it didn't think anything of it, but dropped him off, came back, and we flew from Atlanta, Georgia to the Bahamas and thought we were going to have us, like I said, a great time. First 2 days were remarkable. We had some great time at the beach, some time at the pool, fruity drinks, the things that people do when they're on this island resort and have their vacation. And one of the things that Maleka and we had talked about doing was going on a little excursion, leaving the resort and taking a trip to tour the island, see some of the things that we weren't going to typically see. So people do this all the time. We didn't think anything of it. So we booked that excursion on the third day of the trip. So we got up that morning, all excited. We went to breakfast. We went to the edge of the resort where a bus was picking us up. And there were other couples coming up, and we were starting to mingle with them on the way to the marina where we were going to take off, get to the marina. And they had two tours. One was a half-day tour, and one was a full-day tour. And now we, in the midst of wanting to relax and unwind, we had talked about it, and we had planned to go back earlier in the afternoon. So we were only going to do the half-day tour. I wanted to go golfing that afternoon. She had a couple of things that she wanted to shop and look at the resort. So we were like, okay, that's going to be what we do for the day. So we make the decision to get on the boat for the half-day tour. At 9 o'clock, we take off from the marina. And at 9:05, my life had changed forever. At 9:05, I found myself waking up face down on the surface of this burning boat. Unbeknownst to us, Maleka and we were sitting right above a fuel tank, and a fuel leak had emanated from that tank. And somehow a spark happened that led to an explosion. And so as I find myself waking up on this boat, being knocked unconscious, I'm looking down and I could see my left foot. My left foot was dangling, blood gushing out. I didn't know what happened. Maleka wasn't on the boat. Nobody's on the boat. I could see that second boat. They were still not too far away from us. And I could see passengers on that boat yelling, get off the boat, get off the boat, get off the boat. And I'm trying to process what's going on. And I find myself trying to push myself up. And I crumble. I try to push myself up again. Well, I didn't know it at the time. My collarbone was broken in 4 places. And so I couldn't do anything because literally my right leg was on fire from the flames of the boat. I used my right hand, was able to reach out and put my fingertips in the ridges of that boat and start pulling myself, dragging myself away from the flames until I pass out again. Now, by the grace of God, the water was still shallow where we were. The second boat that took off for that full day tour wasn't too far away. And some of those passengers risked their lives to swim over and pull me off the edge of the boat before the second fuel tank exploded. And so as I'm getting on that second boat, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what's happened. I don't know where my wife is. I don't know what's going on. And one of the passengers who we had actually started talking with on the bus ride over there, he had told me that Maleka had gone in a different direction and that there was another boat that picked her up and that she was going to this clinic, that they were taking her to the hospital. And they were taking me there as well. So they get me to shore. I get placed on, since this is the Bahamas, there isn't, the same amenities that we're used to having, bumpy roads, just all kinds of, not ambulances that come all over the place. She was put on an ambulance. I was placed on the piece of plywood on the back of a pickup truck to go to this clinic. So I was feeling every possible bump I could on the way getting there. And I was physically hurt. As I get to that clinic, they put me on a stretcher and wheel me in. And as I'm being wheeled in, I could hear Maleka. That's the first time I heard her. I heard her moans, her agony, her pain. I couldn't do anything about it. Now, they had me along with one other passenger that was on the boat and Maleka in this clinic, 3 different bays and 1 doctor. And when the doctor finally came over to me, my first question to him was, how is my wife? How is Maleka? Because I could hear her as I was trying to silence myself. And I was praying to God. I was praying that she was going to be okay. But I couldn't talk to her. But I could hear her yelling in her pain. And the doctor said that we're going to send you and this one other passenger to the good hospital because we can't treat you here in this clinic. My concern was about my wife. And so he told me that she was going to come to that hospital later. Now, he didn't say any other details, but the fact that I thought that she was coming later meant that, okay, I had more damage and that she must be okay if they're not sending her right away. So that gave me a little bit of peace and calmness, thinking that, okay, I will see my wife later and her injuries and damage must not be as bad as mine is. So just off of that, they pretty much wrapped what's left of my foot up into a bandage and put me on an ambulance to send me to the airport to fly me to Nassau, where the good hospital was. And as I'm getting there, they're putting me through surgery. I'm asking them, where's my wife? Has she gotten here yet? And nobody says anything. And before I know it, I'm being put to sleep for surgery. They're trying to reattach what's left of my foot to my leg. So I wake up a couple hours later and in ICU, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Maleka has to be here by now. They said she was coming shortly after left the clinic. So as I wake up, 2 doctors, they come into my room. And before they even say anything, I ask them, where is Maleka? Where is my wife? The 2 doctors, they look at each other confused. And before really saying anything, they tell me we'll be right back. And they walk out the room. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the most obvious question that I could be asking. And they didn't want to tell me anything. So I'm thinking, okay, she must be in another room. Maybe they're trying to see if she's alert, awake, whatnot. But we're going to give me some type of feedback. After about 5 minutes, they come back in. And one of the doctors tells me, Mr. Jackson, we hate to inform you, but your wife didn't make it. Now, Maurice, I'm an eternal optimist. And even though I was in this horrific situation, I'm thinking to myself, my wife didn't make it. That must have meant that something happened with the airplane. They needed some fuel or something. They had an issue and she hasn't gotten here yet, but she's still going to be here.
Right.
But they told me, no, your wife passed away at that clinic. They didn't want you to know before they sent you here. And so I found myself on what was supposed to be a momentous occasion, a happy moment. We're celebrating our anniversary and talking about our life from that point forward. That she was no longer going to be here. I found myself crying myself to sleep that night and just in shock because I couldn't believe what has happened. I'm not concerned about my physical state, even though I'm truly physically broken.
Absolutely.
But I'm trying to process the fact that the love of my life, that the woman who I was planning to build everything with was taken away from me. Now I wake up that next day and I had to do something that was also very difficult. I found myself calling that son, that 12-year-old boy, and having to tell him over the phone, son, your mom and dad has been in an accident and your mom's not coming home. And to have to hear him on the other end of that phone and telling me, yelling that, no, this can't be true. This can't be the case. And me trying to reassure him, son, we're going to get through this. It's going to be all right. I'm telling him that I'm going to be okay, even though I don't know if I'm going to be okay. But trying to pass that information along, the only woman who he's known is no longer here. It was one of the most difficult things I had to deal with emotionally. And then to make matters even more challenging, later that afternoon, my vitals started to get worse. And I was starting to feel worse and worse. Well, what had happened was my foot that was severed had gotten infected. And when they tried to reattach what was left of my foot to my leg, that infection started going through my body. So it was starting to cause some of my body, my organs to break down. And I laid there and I could see the EKG monitor over my head. And I saw my vital signs go from green to yellow to red. And I'm praying to God through all of this. Why did this have to happen to us? What did we do to deserve this? And I've had to try to, in that early stage, come to grips with the fact that he took Maleka home. But now I'm getting angry with God, and I'm realizing the fact that the next time I close my eyes is probably the last time I close my eyes. That he's taken my son's mother away, and now my life is about to come to an end. And I laid there and I cried, and I found myself in a state where I was in the truest state of despair you could imagine. When you're trying to accept the fact that you're about to die and that you've already lost your wife. In some sense, I was thinking, well, maybe it's meant for me to be with Maleka. And you've taken her home, and now you're going to take me home. But then I thought about Cameron, and I thought about just how did this happen, and why did this have to happen to us, and why did he have to suffer from not having a mom or a dad? And as I cried myself to sleep that night, I honestly didn't think that God was going to wake me up the next day. So that next morning, we talk about how it's a blessing to wake up every day. I woke up feeling blessed that next day because I was still alive. And as I was waking up, there were some things happening in the background. And it's amazing how God works when you don't even realize it. My sister and my mom, they had been contacted about what had happened. They made their way over to the Bahamas, and they were working to try to get me out of there because they saw how poorly the treatment was and the healthcare was there. The doctors had stopped giving me anything to deal with the infection. They were just giving me tramadol to deal with the pain. And so it was almost as if they were waiting for me to pass away. But in the midst of everything, there was a level 1 trauma unit in Florida, saw what happened. They heard the story. They were like, we need to get him here. So there were a number of things in the back that were working out to get me basically confiscated from that hospital bed, put on an air ambulance, and flown to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I was there that afternoon. And as I got there, the doctors told my family, we got to do whatever we can to ensure that he survives. And I didn't realize it at the time. I knew I was in so much pain. I had a broken right foot, 3rd-degree burns on my right leg, a fractured pelvis, fractured vertebrae, bruised ribs. And as I said, my collarbone was broken in 4 places. And I had been in and out of consciousness 5 times. And so in the midst of all that, they said that they were going to do whatever they could to ensure that I survived. So later that same evening, I go into emergency surgery and I wake up and my left leg below the knee is gone. And so at that point, they did what they needed to stop the infection. Next day, I had to go through 4 surgeries in that one day just to start, trying to put some of the other pieces back together. And it was the next day where I was starting to begin to process the fact that I'm still here. And I was praying to God and talking to God this whole time, but he spoke to me very, very clearly in that moment. And he told me, Tiran, if I wanted to, I could have taken your life when that boat exploded. I could have taken your life when your vital signs went from green to yellow to red and you didn't think you were going to make it. I could have taken you when you went through all these surgeries the day before because I was still unstable. But he said that he was keeping me here and he was keeping me here for a reason. But I still had work to do. That I still had some purpose to fulfill. And that Maleka had already fulfilled what she needed to do on this earth. She was very giving, very caring. She sacrificed herself all the time for people. She was very service oriented, and she did everything that she could for others to be able to succeed in whatever area that she could.
I almost feel like I need to jump in right here only because she clearly still is. She's still fulfilling her purpose.
Yeah.
All a person has to do is do a Google search on the man you have become, who is not the man completely that she knew. You are an evolved creature, and your evolution has her DNA written all over it. And that is one of the things that it honestly brought tears to my eyes as because your book in moments it's painful to listen to, because we're on the journey with you, meeting her and going through these experiences, and we kind of know what's about to happen. And yet in the end, when you understand the man you've become, the father you've become, the coach that you are now, the speaker that you are, and all these lives you're changing. One thing that I know is that when God creates a good woman, he creates a multiplier, right? Women multiply everything that the man brings to them. And even in her departure from the earth, she's multiplied everything you're touching in the earth. That's the journey that I'm seeing when I'm seeing you. And I just felt like I had to interject that, because her purpose is still here and still evident. And I just think that's so incredible.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Maurice, and you're so true. You're so right about that. One of the things in looking back at where we were and just what's happened to me since all of that time, I realized that I had a front row seat of an amazing individual who was showing me how to do things while she was here. And even though she's no longer here, that legacy still lives. And it's in a different way than most people would desire or expect or anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
But Cameron and I have an angel that's looking down on us.
Come on.
And is guiding us. And as I said, I got to see what it was like for someone who was so giving, so selfless. And seeing that and being able to look back at the times that we've had together and the moments that we shared and the ways that I saw her operate, it laid out somewhat of a framework or a roadmap for me on the way that I needed to take those steps to make the transformation to the man I am now and the man I'm still becoming. So when we talk about transformation and evolution and some of the triggers that sparked that, reflecting on her in those times and who she was definitely one of those triggers that created the change in who I was. When I reflect back and look at certain moments in our life and certain moments in my recovery, there's no way I would have been the person I was, one, if it wasn't for God, and two, if I didn't have the influence that she had on my life.
That's good.
So those things are, she's definitely here living more than just in the spirit, but her influence has been so great on myself, on my son, on the people who she did touch in her life. So it's still there, but I am living that every day.
Every day. It is just, the crazy thing is, I was on a podcast. Okay. I was a guest on a podcast, and I get to the end of the podcast, and the person says, listen, there's this guy, and you have to hear his story, because I think that you guys, if you had a conversation, it would just be so powerful. And I was like, okay, we'll just I'll look him up. And so I started just watching videos and listening to you speak and all these things. And I realized just that, you're not just somebody that I wanted to interview on my podcast, but you're a voice that I needed in this season of my life, where whether you understand that or not, right? As I'm in a journey of growing as a man and a husband and a father and all these things, your message of resilience, it spoke to me in this specific place of my life that I really needed, right? I'm all about teaching you got to look back and reflect on the past in order to find the strength now to walk in purpose that God has for you. The way that you package and bottle that and the message that you deliver to people resonates so deeply with me. And so I think that we need to talk a little bit more about that resilience. There's somebody who's listening today. They haven't had the major tragedy that you have. But they're a business owner. They're a spiritual leader. They're an athlete. There's somebody who they're not sure that they're going to be able to walk in the fullness of what God has for them. It's one failure after another. It's one falter after another. And they're like, I don't got nothing left. I don't have no more fight. The man that I saw in the video had just come back from the Bahamas. He's telling the story of his wife that has just departed. He's just gone through this surgery. He's on the news, and you could just see in the look in that man's eyes that he wasn't sure what he was going to be able to do with the rest of his life. So you are the symbol of resilience. Can you speak to not just the journey of how you found the resilience, but what are the greatest lessons you've learned about resilience? What is that message you're teaching as you coach others and as you speak? What is the key to resilience for someone?
Okay, now great question, Maurice. And let me go into it this way. Resilience has to do with how we come to terms with what's happened to us. Mm-hmm. It's not the adversity. It's the way that we react and respond to the adversity.
That's good.
That determines where we're going to go and how we're going to move forward from that. And a lot of the time, and I struggle from this too, and I think a lot of people do who are going through some level of grief, is that you spend so much time looking in the rearview mirror, looking back at what happened and feeling pity and stuck in that situation that you neglect to look forward to what can be and what has developed as a result of this. So I think that one of the things that I had to do was to begin to actually take the right steps in order to grieve and to heal from that. And as I talked about earlier, sometimes we have to look at the positive aspects of what we had, even though we no longer have it. I tell people resilience is not about regaining what was lost, but it's about reshaping what still remains. And it's what you do with what still remains that determines how you move forward powerfully in the world from that point forward. I had to look back at what I gained from my times with Maleka, definitely. But I had to also look at what I gained from those that 15 years that we had together as husband and wife. And as I stated earlier, I got to see that front row seat of what was going on. So I say this to say that no matter how big or small the adversity is, look at what's positive from that and what you can gain and benefit moving forward, how it can make you better, how it can make you stronger, how it can make you thrive in the future.
What if somebody can't find anything positive? I just want to jump in there because I know how people think. What if somebody says, Tiran, that sounds good, but when I'm looking forward, backwards, in the middle, I don't care where I look, I don't see the positive. What would you say to that person?
This is one of the times where getting that right help or that right coaching to help talk through what those things are. Because sometimes, and I won't even say sometimes, we can sometimes get in our own way because we're thinking and seeing things from our perspective. You know how they say that you're so deep into it that you can't even see what's around you. Mm-hmm. And getting that perspective from an outside source or outside party who can help you find what the lesson should be from the message. And I use this analogy, a lot of times, and don't mind me for going into the word and being faithful and going into the Bible. But there's a lot of times that we can pick up that good book and we can read it and it not make sense to us. Mm. But that's why you have, your pastors, your spiritual advisors, others who can help interpret because they may have a better understanding of what that meaning is and find out what the lesson to learn is. Well, the same holds true with going through some of life's greatest struggles. And we can be unaware or lack that understanding to be able to identify what was good in the situation, what is the lesson, and how we can apply it as we move forward in our lives. And so for that person who is not able to do that, that's where I think we have to reach out for help. And I say the right help, because I think there's, and I can go into this whole talk about grief and the science and the dynamics behind it and the stages and all of these things. But one of the things that grief does is it causes us to not think clearly, and it lessens our mental capability to be able to process certain things. And when you're in a place where you don't have the energy, the focus to be able to figure out these things, that's when you need qualified help that is going to help you do that. Now, a lot of people, and I'm going to speak from the perspective of someone who's lost someone close, a close loved one.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get a lot of input from people that have no basis on how to help you get through that.
Right.
But it's getting the help from the right sources to help you navigate those waters of embracing the loss of your loved one, or for any loss for that matter. You may be losing a job. It may be going through a divorce. It may be coming up with some medical diagnosis that isn't great. But being able to process it, to get to a place of understanding, and then get out of that state of denial and get to acceptance. And once we get to that place of acceptance, then we can actually start looking from this day forward on how I'm going to overcome this obstacle that's in the way, how I can minimize it and reduce it. And from there, we generate strength. We get a strength that we didn't realize that we had. And that strength and that courage that we're getting is where that resilience is really starting to play a role in our life.
That's it.
And what happens is we start to get, small wins. We start to see little positive lights in the midst of the struggles that we're facing. And as we're starting to get those wins, we're actually beginning to grow, transform, and become a version of ourselves that's better than where we started. So,
oh, that's so good. That's so good. There's so many gems that you just said in that. And I guess, one of the things that I was thinking as you were speaking is I was thinking about how, and I would be curious to hear your take on this. I feel like God weaponizes the grief once we reach acceptance. And what I mean by weaponizes is that when the enemy tries to take advantage of your grief, right? He tries to make it attack you, and now it's affecting your self-worth and your value and your will to live and all these things. But I'm going back to your book cover. It says on your book cover, all things work together for the good. The moment I say, God, I trust you, even with the greatest tragedy, the greatest heartbreak, all of those things, that acceptance, God takes that grief, takes that pain. It's not that the pain's not there anymore. He takes it and uses it for the good. And now it's the fuel to begin to change lives and for you to be the father that you need to be to Cameron and to be all of these things you've become, right? I've seen it in my own life. I had 2 brothers pass away in 2 years. And the second of those brothers, when he passed, we were very close. And so some of those tragedies and heartbreaks, at first it was being weaponized against me. Then it became weaponized against the culture that exists where people feel stale and stuck and stagnant, like they can't go any farther. And so I would be curious to get your take on those words. God weaponizes the grief once you reach acceptance.
Yeah. God uses us in ways we don't always understand. But it's all things work together for good, as I said. And so I think that's where having that faith and having that belief, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to get through what I've gone through. I'm one that speaks openly about mental health and depression and anxiety, because I had those things after the accident. I had this guilt, this survivor's remorse. Why was I still here and Maleka not? We were sitting right next to each other. And so I was in a very bad, dark place for some time, but I understand now, and after realizing it, that it was part of the journey that I had to go through in order to be rebuilt in the way God intended for me to be. And that's where, when you start talking about weaponizing, God put certain gifts and skills that were deep down inside of me, but it wasn't going to come out if I was just going to be an engineer and working, what I was doing, and not necessarily seeing that there was this superpower that he had in me, which was going to be able to take this pain and use it to create a greater purpose. And not just to create that greater purpose, but to be able to apply it to other people so their pain won't pull them into that bad place or keep them in that bad place. And so these are talents and gifts and skills that would not have come out had it not been for having that faith and having to go through pain. So when I talk to other people who feel like they're stuck and that their pain defines them, I try to let them know it might be who you are today, right now, but it's not who you're meant to be overall. And let's work together in order to find that pain, galvanize what has really come out of it, and being able to figure out how you can use that to have a better version of your life. Don't forget the memories. Don't forget the loss. Don't forget what you've gone through, because those things create character and they shape you. But at the same time, let's see how we can use those things to create a brighter future for yourself and for others.
I could listen to you talk literally all day long. I'm happy that when you're a podcast host, you can bring a person in to talk. You don't got to pay them to hear their voice, because your voice in this message right now is worth a lot. And I hope some of you, as you're listening, are considering, man, how could I either bring him into my facility, or how do I get hooked up with him as a coach so he can help me take my business or my life to the next level. And so, I was thinking as you were talking just about without the pressure, the oil never forms, right? Without the crushing, the grape never becomes the wine. And so that's really what you're talking about there. That's a level of anointing and a level of power that God has within you. But it wouldn't have come without that level of not only pain, but then the perseverance he called you to afterwards.
Yep.
And so, as with the remaining time that we have, I know that now you are truly touching so many people. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that. So you made this pivot in your career, and now you literally have become a walking, talking billboard for transformation. So could you take us into a little bit of what is the focus of your business now? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Who are you talking to? And if somebody is loving this message, how do they bring you in for that as well?
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So it's funny. First off, let me go with how this actually started.
Mm-hmm.
This was probably about 7 or 8 months after the accident. A friend of mine, good friend of mine, he was a regional manager for a life insurance company, and they were having a conference, and he thought that it would be a good idea. He reached out to me and said, Tiran, would you be open to just sharing your story of what you've gone through? Because the intent was to sort of show these life insurance agents the psyche of someone who has lost that close loved one. And now I've got to try to put the pieces of life back together again. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But I was scared out of my mind. I never intended to be a speaker. I never intended on, being in front of people talking about anything, let alone this tremendous pain that I had faced and gone through. I put something together. I got there. I started talking. And then after 3 minutes, I was like, okay, let me quit this. Let me just speak from the heart and tell my story. And I say this to this day. This is the worst talk I probably had ever given in front of people because it just wasn't structured the way I normally like to do it. But I realized after that there were people who were coming up to me and say, you changed my life, that your perspective changed the way I look at doing the things I have to do every day. And to see you come back after what you've gone through, what you faced, gives me no reason to say I can't attack my challenges and my problems with the vigor, with the energy, by seeing what you've done. Just to put some context to it, after I was injured, the doctor said, okay, well, you might be able to walk with the prosthetic after about 8 months or so, and you might have this limp and this, it might be something permanent. But by having that will, that motivation, that perseverance to push and go through and to treat certain things with a certain level of obsession and following certain principles, I got to where I was physically bouncing back quicker than what they thought. And after 3.5 months, I was walking. And then after a little bit longer, I started jogging, and the jog turned into a run. And then I started running 5Ks, and I started learning how to swim with one leg.
Come on, man.
All of these amazing things that I didn't think was going to be possible based on what happened to me. And so in doing that, I realized that, okay, having that right mindset, the right approach, and being consistent and doing these certain right things on a regular basis were going to get me stronger physically, stronger emotionally, and stronger in all areas of my life. And that's part of what I try to help people see and witness there. So it wasn't until I was actually speaking about those things that I realized that, okay, this isn't just me, but this is something that can help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went back and started looking, because one of the things I started doing, and I was never a writer, but as I was going through this time, I had a lot of time where I would just laying in the bed. I couldn't move. I was physically having to be pushed in a wheelchair because my left arm was in a sling and my left leg was missing. My right foot was I couldn't do anything. So the only thing I could do was write pretty much. And I started writing my thoughts and some of the things that I was feeling as I was going through this to help battle the depression, but also to be able to, I didn't realize it at the time, but create the basis for choosing resilience and how I had to, make that choice. That was the way that the book sort of came about. And, like I said, it's funny how God works, that these things that you don't even think that you're doing are actually being put together as the roadmap that's going to help somebody else get through their issues and challenges in life. So going back to your question, I realized that as I was thinking through this, that resiliency is something that I embodied in order to bounce back from what I went through, and not just bounce back to survive, but to thrive as well. And in doing so, I was reborn that day that boat exploded. So my platform, my business is called Reborn Resilient, because I am a changed man. And if it wasn't for resiliency and the resiliency that God told me I had to have, I wouldn't be here today doing what I need to do. So with Reborn Resilient, what I'm doing is I am helping people realize basically three main principles. One, how to overcome that pain, that trauma, that grief, those challenges that they have in their life that has put them in a place of paralysis where they're stuck and don't know how to move forward. Number two, being able to build that resilience where you can, take certain things that happen negatively in your life and still be able to bounce back and not let it keep you down. And then three, being able to design your life after that tragedy, after that setback. What are those gifts and those skills that you have, which, I had to find, but digging deep to find what those are so you can live the life that you desire as a result of learning the lessons from your pain that you've gone through. So, in a lot of ways, we spend a lot of time trying to do so many things by ourselves. And when you're emotionally shook, like, most people are when something negative happens, you're going to need help to get back on track, and not even get back on the same track that you were on, but you're going to have to possibly pivot and go down a different path. I've gone through this road. I've seen what it's like. Even though someone else's struggle or challenge won't be identical to what I've gone through, some of the same principles apply. I talk about how it's important to go through this phase of restoration, to heal first before you start moving. I see so many people try to get back to life as it was. And it wasn't intended to go back to life as it was, but you try to do this as a distraction to keep you from having to deal with the loss, the pain, the challenges that you have to face. Mm-hmm. That is a means of basically trying to neglect what's really going on. So I'd work with people to dig deeper into that. And I can go through the whole thing and finding that obsession, that laser-like focus of what's important, having to get to that place of acceptance. I talk about that because a lot of time you're in denial and you're not able to get to that place, and you've got to get there before to move forward. I think somewhere up here on my core values, discipline is something that I think is critical, but we have to work on building that, having the right motivation to keep going. And I tell this story to people because when I started thinking about my motivation, I remember laying in the bed one day, and I didn't want to get up to do the physical therapy as I was starting to heal. But I thought back to a conversation that Maleka and I had about a year before the accident. And we were watching a movie and someone passed away. And after we had this what if conversation, what if something happens to me? What would you want me to do? And she told me, after thinking about it for a second, she wouldn't want me to grieve for too long. She wouldn't want me to not move forward with life. She sort of gave me a blessing to go forward, which, you don't even think about those things in that moment. But after the fact, having that conversation was one of the most important things. She gave me this list of 7 women that she said under no circumstances whatsoever I need to talk to or have them in my house. Because she was like, nah, them ain't my real friends. But then the most important thing that she did was she told me that I needed to do everything that I could to make sure that the only part of her that was still left on this earth was well taken care of. And that was our son, Cameron.
Cameron.
So when I was thinking about, well, dang, I don't want to get out of the bed and do this physical therapy. I don't want to go to this grief counseling. I had to think about my promise to her that I needed to be strong. I needed to be the man I needed to be. I needed to be available so I could raise our son to be the man that he needs to be. And so when you talk about motivation, that was my motivation. I had to use that to keep going. Now it's the attitude, it's process, all these other elements that go into actually building that resilience and being able to move forward in life. But, you know, these are the type of principles and things that I coach and work with people to get through, because in order to get to where we want to go, we have to be able to visualize it. Everywhere you got in life, your mind got there first. So you have to be able to see that destination, or at least have an idea of what it looks like. But sometimes we don't have that clarity to get there, and we don't know how we're going to get there. And so I see people wandering around aimlessly, as I was too for a period of time before that clarity started to come into fruition. So I help people get that clarity and take those steps to move through the grief, to be able to build their resilience, and then to be able to redesign their life and then actually implement what's needed in order to do that. That's where my life coaching through Reborn Resilient comes into play. And so for anybody who is interested to learn more about not just my book and my business, you can visit me at rebornresilient.com. That's, or find me anywhere on social media with either Tiran Jackson Official or Reborn Resilient to learn more.
And you guys can see that information on the screen. If you're watching, if you guys are listening to the podcast right now, just take a look in the show descriptions. You will find those links there. And so one thing that I want to do is to make sure that somebody who has been blessed, has been touched by this conversation, and you're thinking, man, his message is the catalyst that I need. I want to go ahead. Hope Rising is going to go ahead and purchase a copy of your book for one of our guests. And so let's do this. If you have been listening today, I don't care if you're listening to the podcast, you're watching on YouTube, whatever it might be. If you want a copy of the book, go ahead and email Jason at ewtproductions.com. That is the producer of the show. When Jason gets the email, he is going to go ahead. And if you're the first one, we will let Tiran know. And then Tiran will send you a copy of the book, but it's on us, because let's go ahead and spark somebody's transformation into getting to that resilience, or should I say, let's spark somebody's rebirth, right? And so, and you know, as I wrap, because I know I got to get you out of here. There was one thing I wanted to say before I ask you the final question. I was thinking about, there's this scene in your book where you wake up on the ship and one of your arms is not working, and the people on the outside of the boat are screaming to you, get off the boat, get off the boat. And you described how your right hand, it was almost like you were clenching your nails into the ground and scraping yourself forward. And I'm a very visual person. And so I was literally watching you do it. And I couldn't help but to think of that as you started talking about, my left arm was in a sling. Everything else was messed up. I couldn't move. But God had given you the hand that you write with to be the starting of you fighting for your life, and then the starting of telling your story. The only thing he gave you the faculties to and the access to was the hand to begin to write the next part of your journey. That is the intentionality of God, if I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
And it's just, there was something in that visual. And I hope God uses that for you as you move forward, that as you begin to think about that. Right. And so here is the final question of today. And if you guys have been listening, if you've been blessed, if you've been touched by this conversation, would you subscribe to the YouTube channel, or subscribe to wherever you're listening to the podcast? Leave comments. What was the part that Tiran said and you were like, man, I needed to hear that? Leave your comments. Share this with a friend. Here's the final question. This is what I ask every guest. I want you to pretend that it is 100 years from now. And there is a museum. It's a popular culture museum. And there's a room that's marked hope. When the person walks inside, they see a bunch of time capsules, and there is a time capsule with your name on it. And inside there are photos of you and Cameron, and you and Maleka, and you speaking in front of crowds, and your book is in there. And there's this clip. And on this clip, you explain to someone what hope means to you. What is hope to Tiran Jackson.
What is hope? Hope is that piece of faith in us, that portion of faith that allows us to believe that things are going to be better and that God is working in order to make something good occur for us. No matter what we're facing, whatever situation, whatever trial that we find ourselves going through, I think that we have to have hope that we can reach that destination that we're looking for. And it's with faith that allows us to be able to get there. Now, there are a number of other sub elements that come into play with it, but to have that mindset to desire and want to get out of the bad situation or even to maintain great situations, that's where that hope lies. And so I think if we don't have hope, we are headed towards our demise. That we need to have hope in order to aspire to better things in life and not succumb to all the challenges, issues, and basically the devil taking things away from us. So maybe not the cleanest answer, but that's where I think hope comes into play and what I see hope being from my perspective.
Well, I have grown in my levels of hope on the inside from listening to this conversation, and I'm not just saying that because there's a when a person listens to your story, there's this voice on the inside that will tell you, well, if he can, then I can. And I think that really ultimately is the most beautiful part of your journey. Looking at you standing by your son who's plays sports and is doing all these things now, great things, and I'm looking at that, and I've got a 2-year-old boy. And it lets me know what I can be to my 2-year-old boy. Listening to your book and walking inside to my wife, right, lets me know how hard I have to fight to become a better husband. And so this conversation for me has been a blessing. And I hope for every listener it has been as well. I hope that you all took out of this conversation, whatever the situation you're in, no matter how much pain or frustration or anger or strife or whatever it is, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So there's these moments when you got to look to something higher and say, use it, please. Use this for good so that it's not just being used to keep me stuck, but let me use it so that it can propel me forward into the purpose I was born to live. So with that, I thank you all for listening. I thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Hope Rising, where the unfulfilled go for fulfillment and the uninspired go for a dose of inspiration.